Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got an awesome event lined up for you today. The topic of today's event is Phish Stories, and it's a series about the latest phishing attacks that are challenging businesses today. And I have to tell you, we've got some scary stories out there that you need to be aware of. I'm excited to hear from an expert today in the industry who I'll introduce you to in just a moment. This event is brought to you in partnership with SlashNext and produced by Actual Tech Media. Now, before we get started, just a few things that you should know about the webinar today. First off, questions. We want this to be educational. We encourage your questions there in the questions box. I see many of you already saying good morning or hello from around the world and across the United States, but we also want your technical questions around phishing and how to prevent phishing. Of course, most importantly, so many companies out there are being hit hard by phishing attacks. It's in the news almost every day, every night on the evening news. And, so many small companies, my local fire department was held ransom. My friend's baby pictures were held ransom. These are personal things that mean a lot to us. And of course, there are also, huge organizations that are being held for ransom, all coming from these phishing attacks. And so we've got to stop these before they happen. And that's what you'll be learning about today. We will be doing a prize at the end of the event. If you're attending live, it's an Amazon $300 gift card. The prize terms and conditions are there in the handouts tab. And on today's special event, we also have our new best question prize that we're doing. It's a $50 Amazon gift card that we will announce after the event. We also have 7 different handouts there in the handouts tab. I want you to be aware of. There is a link to request a free demo. We'll be talking about that later in the event. The free risk assessment, the free trial, the Tolly test report on the SlashNext phishing prevention solution. There are also a number of comparisons there that you need to be aware of. So make sure that you check out those excellent resources provided to you by SlashNext before you end the event today, because they won't be as readily accessible after today's presentation. And with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to today's expert presenter. Let me bring on Mr. Patrick Haar, Chief Executive Officer at SlashNext. Patrick, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be on again. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. This is going to be a fun, live, conversational thing here. We're going to do our best to take questions from the audience. We've got some pre-prepared questions that we took from the audience ahead of time. And so let's go ahead and just jump right into it. The first question that I wanted to pose to you is just kind of a high-level, start around phishing, and that is, what's changed? What's changed in the phishing landscape recently that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, a lot has changed, and much like for everyone, last year was really a significant change, whether it was remote working, remote learning, obviously adapting to a very, very strange circumstance and very challenging circumstance at times. With that as well, I would say the bad actors have become much more sophisticated because they now saw much broader, what we would call an attack surface. And so at its core, I would say 2020 was the year of the Phish, and not just the Phish, the targeted spear-phish. And I'll talk about that a little bit further detail. I'd say second, what has changed is how the phishers are getting to you. It used to be that phishing was just effectively email. It was an email-borne attack, and it was for credential stealing. And what's fundamentally changed now is that these big phishers are using legitimate infrastructure. They're using AI and automation. They have access to very, very low compute resources to do these very targeted, fast attacks. And what's occurred is the success of these attacks has dramatically changed. I just like to say that phishing is the beginning of all things evil. Because phishing, according to Gartner, 95% of all external attacks start with phishing. The reason for that, they're targeting the weakest link in security, which are users, right? We're all, fallible to something. And getting back to this point, when we've shifted to remote working, remote learning, what's happening is we are now going in and out of our corporate email, the personal email to print something. over to LinkedIn Messenger to check something that came in on that side, over to Facebook Messenger, back into Zoom. And there's chats going on inside of Zoom. We've heard of the Zoom bomb aspects. You go into Teams, you go back into Slack, which has become a very trusted communication. You then get a text message on this phone that says, "Hey, your Chase banking credentials were compromised." So there's a lot of things that happened this last year, and with that, again, number one, these bad actors have very, very fast access, inexpensive resources to deliver these targeted attacks. Second, they broaden the attacks that they are delivering, again, outside of email. So they now use not just email, they use SMS. That's perhaps the second most popular way to attack you. They're using these social networks, right? The LinkedIn messengers, the Facebook messengers. They're also using the new collaboration tools. So whether this be Box, Dropbox, Teams, Zoom, it's even in gaming, right? I'm sure you have kids, and we see this in Discord as an example. So they have new communication channels to deliver these, and they become much more sophisticated in the types of phishing attacks they're doing. It's no longer just credential stealing, right? Which is a main effort of these guys. If I get your credentials, I have the keys to the kingdom. But they're doing scareware tactics. So the scareware is, how do I get you to scare you to do something? Social engineering attacks, rogue software attacks. In fact, I'll talk about this a little bit further detail. That's the scariest one we see, because that has the ability to drop in ransomware and malware and some of these callbacks that are doing pretty significant damage. And then finally, we see these I would say more support attacks. So you have the broad effectiveness of what's going on out there in the market with these phishers, because of some of the things I've talked about with AI and automation, and the ability to deliver these new attacks across these significant channels. That's the reason why 2020 was very much the year of the Phish. And so we'll talk about how you can prevent some of these things, but it has become very, very scary what we see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you make some great points there. One that caught my eye is the sharing of the laptop for multiple use cases. I mean, I'm sure whether the IT department likes it or not, there are many children who are doing virtual at home schooling now, using perhaps their parents' work computer to do it, in the evening or whatever it might be. And also, you made a great point about SMS text messaging. I mean, unlike email, where you might have a lot of different things to really kind of make your decision on whether it's real or not real. With a Phish via SMS, you don't have very much information. There might just be 3 lines, and you have to decide, is this really Capital One or not that wants to reset my password, or is this a Phish? So you don't have a lot of clues, and it gets harder and harder for even experienced IT professionals like myself to try to figure out if this is really a legitimate email or a legitimate SMS message or not. So great points. We've got a lot of great questions already rolling in. Thank you for those. We will do our best to respond to those here coming up. But first, let's talk a little bit about automation and AI. Has this been used for attacking us more effectively?
Yeah. It's really what I was getting to. What we are seeing is almost, we've heard a lot about next gen and what we would characterize as 2.0 phishing attacks. And what I mean by that is the bad actors are now using the very things that have really spearheaded growth out there in the technology market, which is namely public clouds or legitimate infrastructures. They have open source AI and ML models. They have access to dark web information, but also LinkedIn, other behavioral information about you as an individual. This becomes effectively a concoction of badness. And what I mean by that, you bring all these things together. I now have the ability to do a very targeted yet mass attack that is very inexpensive, that I drive to you as a user. And so this is, again, what we would call a second generation phishing attack or phishing approach. And if you move, I think we actually have a slide here I can just quickly talk through here. So as I was really getting to, we're now in this, and this was 2020, right? And kind of a recast. where these bad actors are now using second generation phishing attacks, and I've walked through some of these things. But at its core, what these phishers have available to them, these bad actors have available to them, is very inexpensive, low cost compute available in legitimate infrastructure. And what I mean by that, in Google or GCP or AWS or Azure, it's a trusted source or trusted infrastructure, very low cost to generate attacks. I can correlate that to using AI or behavioral models with actual information from the dark web and or LinkedIn or some other information I can glean about you and your reporting relationships, as an example, in a company. I use those combinations with automation to now deliver these very effective targeted attacks. And I'm doing these not where these attacks live for weeks and months. They're actually living for 24, 36, 48 hours. So they're spawning these attacks very, very rapidly. And as I was noting, through AI and automation, they're able to target these much more specifically and move beyond just that regular credential stealing. Again, this kind of highlights this flow of credential stealing attacks to scareware attacks to scam attacks to rogue software attacks that are now enveloping the user across these different communication channels. So again, whether it's coming through email or SMS that we just talked about, and in fact, SMS is now a more trusted source of communication, or text messaging is a more trusted source of communication than email itself, right? What do you respond to first? Do you respond to a text or you respond to email? So do you think about that? But they're also coming through these social networking channels. Again, everyone uses Facebook Messenger or LinkedIn Messenger or WhatsApp. You pick your favorite one. And then again, finally, you have these collaboration services and even gaming that I talked about. So you have this really enveloping of the user where they're bombarded from multiple different ways. You then correlate that with the fact that, again, in 2020, we had a dramatic shift. And it wasn't just a evolutionary, it was a revolutionary shift to remote learning and remote working. And couple that with the fact that I am working on that laptop at the same time as you pointed out, my child comes in. This absolutely happened to me. My child come in and started doing schoolwork. I didn't even know because I had taken a break and loaded a Google Chrome browser. That browser extension actually had stuff behind it. Wasn't good stuff. I still have some challenges with my machine, right? So we had to go back and re-image it and clean it. But those are the things that are happening, not just on a daily basis, but an hourly and even on a minute by minute basis. I'm sure that you and everyone out there in the audience got hey, your gift package was left on your doorstep in text. But it's not just even these, what I would characterize link-based attacks. We're also seeing natural language attacks. So in text, as an example, the IRS calls and you're being audited. You need to call this number, 800 XXX. So it has no link to it. So they get you to call, right? So these are the type of mass attacks, but they're targeted, very low cost, and they're able to do these again because of AI and automation. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, because they are using the very techniques that spawn these very sophisticated targeted attacks. You have to fight those, as I like to say, machines with machines. That's the only way to stay ahead of the curve. It's the reason why you also have to be very, very careful, because all the defenses that are out there right now were built to stop that 1.0, that first generation of phishing attacks. Namely, and we'll talk about this a little bit further, namely what we'd characterize as reputation based attacks, meaning I have a trusted google.com, and because I trust that site, I'm not going to worry about it. Again, the bad actors are nesting themselves deep inside the legitimate infrastructure. And again, we'll show this in just a moment. But as an example, inside Google itself, we gave them a report. They have 50,000 live phishing attacks nested in google.com ///. It's part of the reason why we call it SlashNext, because they're embedding themselves deep in this legitimate infrastructure. And so if you have just a trusted reputation as your defense, you're going to miss it. And it's the reason why we see 70, 80% of all these attacks get through your current defenses.
It's hard for me even to wrap my head around the sophistication of these attacks. I mean, I think it's like any smart business. These malicious actors have taken the ransoms from the past, and they've done research and development, and they've improved their systems using the public cloud resources and open source, like you said. And so it makes it challenging, for us in IT. That's not our full-time job to protect our infrastructure with the latest cutting edge technology. I mean, but it should be, and it needs to be. So we have to, like you said, match their machines with our machines, match their bots with our bots. And I'm excited to learn more about that. We called this, Phish stories. So I know we got a lot of good stories here coming up. Let's move on now to the next question and talk about how much has phishing grown up since 2020 and the start of the pandemic. We talked a little bit about that, but do you see this continuing to rise?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really goes to the heart. So as I noted, 2020 really was the year of the quote Phish, and specifically the year of, I would say, the second generation phishing attack. And much like, again, we all experience a very, just as I said, revolutionary change, remote learning and remote working that started in March, kind of at the tipping point of the pandemic. We also saw, because those bad actors have now those available open source AI models and low cost compute and hosting inside a legitimate infrastructure, we saw a mass increase in the rise of attacks. And those rise of attacks happen, again, not just with credential stealing, the rogue software, the scareware tactics, the scams, and deliver across those different communication channels. But as this chart notes, and we have what I would characterize the world's biggest phishing lab now, right, where we're doing continual research and automating and looking at these different attacks and scanning for these aspects. So as this chart notes, again, first phase was in March, a significant increase, significant rise. This correlates with what you'll also see in Google Safe Browsing and some of the other studies out there. There was kind of a second wave that happened in the June-July period, almost correlating with that next push in the kind of the mass pandemic aspects that were occurring in the market. And I think the reason why we're seeing the correlation here, because I would also argue there's almost a third wave underway right now with the vaccination, right? And so we're seeing scams that are actually posing, hey, come get your vaccination here, or trust this particular source from this particular hospital. Again, all in an attempt to get some information from you, to steal your information, or scare you to do something. So I would say, again, number one, 2020 was very eye-opening in terms of these attacks. What is behind these attacks is also eye-opening, because there's a line in here, what's called C2 callback or callbacks, right? These, which is, once, as an example, I download a rogue browser extension inside of Google Chrome. Behind that, because we see these inside of customers right now, behind that is ransomware. It's infected a particular machine or a couple machines. That's then doing, how we see this, is there a direct correlation to callbacks? So we start seeing callbacks to the destination who's trying to steal something or do something to that machine. The same thing holds true in malware. So all this stuff is correlating pretty significantly to what we just talked about in terms of the types of attacks, the sheer number of these attacks. And I absolutely expect this to continue in 2021, 2022. And the reason for that is remote working, remote learning is here to stay. We're not going backwards, right? I would also say, second, digitization is here to stay. We probably advanced 4 to 5 years in the last 6 months in terms of digital transformation. Everyone's talked about that, but we really are there. And with that, with the availability of these low-cost resources, these open AI models that can now deliver these target attacks, and the fact that you're always going to be working and playing on the same device, it's not going away. And so that's the reason why companies and as well as just even consumers have to be very diligent in how they look at this now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some incredible statistics. I mean, this has been the year of opportunity for these malicious attackers out there, the year of phishing, and it's not stopping. It's only increasing. So let's talk now about some examples of the latest spear phishing attacks out there that use legitimate infrastructure. And I found this very interesting. Patrick, you want to tell us about this?
Yeah. So again, what we mean by legitimate infrastructure, it could be AWS public cloud resource, or Azure, or Google, or GoDaddy, right? Someone that's a trusted source of delivering hosted information. So again, the bad actors have become wise. They recognized that the first generation of stopping phishing was really focused on the reputation, static, more signature based forensic approach. I would also add human forensics, because it was really more data scientists or people looking behind the scenes and say, hey, is this bad or is it not bad? And doing a classification. This is the reason why you would see a score of 0 to 10. Be careful. And if it's 10 out of 10, take more action. But because they have this, quote, trusted, legitimate infrastructure, all these tools that are meant to detect and block the stuff, they're like, okay, this is a trusted site, let it go through. So this is an exact example of something that we see daily, right? Our focal point is how do we catch these 0 hour, or what we call 0 hour behavioral attacks or targeted attacks before, and detect and prevent them before they happen. So this is an example of a targeted spear phishing attack that was hosted in Google's app engine called AppSource. As you see, it was generated in December 19th. On that day, this is an O365 login page. On that day, this particular phisher generated 20,000 unique targeted spear phishing attacks, almost in a single. It was actually within 5 minutes. That's how fast it can be done. And then they propagated those out into the wild. And as you can see here, this exact attack looks exactly like you would get your own O365 login. I'll show another example in just a moment, because some people believe, okay, I can just stop this with two-factor authentication. You can't do that, because they're actually also nesting themselves inside of two-factor authentication. Again, I'll show that in just a moment. The point here is that, again, to the naked eye, you can't tell. It's coming from a legitimate infrastructure. So you're trusting that source, meaning your current defenses are going to be evaded, because that's what they're really looking at. Is it trusted for me as a tool? So it's getting through, and you're used to putting your credentials inside of an O365 login, right? So this is a reason why they continually attack you. And there's one other aspect here. It may look like it came from someone that you trust as an individual, because they got some behavioral information about you. It could be your boss in LinkedIn, right? They kind of cross correlate these different things. That's what makes these things very scary. And again, to the naked eye, you cannot tell that there is something wrong here.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've answered a prompt just like that almost every day for, years. So I can see where someone getting in the
Yeah.
habit of that, they would just very quickly put their credentials in there and move on. So what about two-factor authentication? There's actually a couple questions that came in on that topic.
Yes. So again, one way people believe that they can stop this is through two-factor authentication. But to this very point, this is actually a rogue browser extension. As I highlighted, perhaps the scariest thing personally that I see right now are these rogue browser extensions. As an example, I can put inside of Chrome, or rogue browser software kind of prompts. It could be to download a player or update this particular X. It could be, I've got a software update, go do this aspect. And in this particular case, this was an attack that uses they embedded themselves in the two-factor authentication process. So even though they had enabled it, you went through that basis. The attack was sitting behind. Again, in this case, it's rogue software, and behind that aspect was ransomware. And so this was a chase attack, which obviously, again, there's a lot of impersonation of popular brands out there, right? In this case, it's a bank, gets you to do something to go to, could be to steal your credentials to access your bank account. But the point here is that they have the ability to embed themselves inside the two-factor authentication process. So that in and of itself, if you implement that, does not prevent these. It can prevent some of these attacks, right? But it's not going to prevent all these attacks. And that is really to the point, going back to what we talked about. Number one, they're hosting on legitimate infrastructure. Two, the cost of compute, right, is very, very inexpensive inside these public clouds or these other hosting environments now, where I could take these open source AI machine learning models, correlate that to behavioral information, and then launch the attack that looks like it came from that very legitimate. In this case, it could look like it's coming from Chase itself, from this legitimate infrastructure. And again, they've embedded themselves inside two-factor authentication, and voila, they've now had success. And the scary thing here, this attack will live for a particular time. Again, 48 hours, 72 hours. And then they'll, because of the inexpensive cost they have to create these things, they'll launch the next one and the next one and the next one until they have success. Because they know if they bombard you enough through these different communication channels that we're all using and we're all busy, they know that they're going to have success. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. We would not see the dramatic increase and rise of the number of phishing attacks that we've seen.
Absolutely. I mean, it reminds me of those, like the military missile shields. At some point, if there's just so many missiles coming in, there's only so much that defense system can do. And if these attackers can quickly spin up new infrastructure just on any public cloud anywhere in the world and blast you with 30,000 attacks, it's tough to prevent that.
Yeah.
So, what does the VirusTotal report here tell us, Patrick?
Yeah, so back to the attack we just showed you, and to the point that these attacks are living 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. If you do not detect and block these attacks almost at time of creation, and there's some things that I can talk to you about what we do. We obviously we fight machines with machines, right? Everything we do is AI based and computer vision, natural language processing, and behavioral analysis. And we cook things effectively in virtual browsers. And so we have the ability to detect these attacks almost literally at the time of creation, because we're looking at newly registered domains. We're looking at different sources of data to find at the time they go live with that attack, how do we detect it and block it? And so this is an actual indicator of this, or one indicator of this, where we detect these type of attacks. That attack I just showed you, where no one else out there on the market has detected, even that this was days later. And it's not uncommon that we see this. This was actually from this weekend, and that attack was a couple of weeks ago. So it's not uncommon when we go in and check it against VirusTotal, all the other defenses out there still are not detecting it. So what does that mean to you? You have a big gap in your security posture. And any good security posture is a layered security posture, right? I'm not going to ever say, and anyone that sits here and say anything's 100% foolproof, they're lying to you. There is nothing that's foolproof. But what is absolutely the case today is that these bad actors become, through this second generation phishing approach, now have learned how to evade all the defenses that were put in place that were built around that first generation static reputation that I talked about. Where in this case, what we are doing now, and obviously I expect others to do, is use AI forensic dynamic runtime analysis. So at the time of creation of these attacks, you scan that and you have machines look at, hey, is there something wrong? Is the logo off? Is the language different? Does it have the ability to look behind CAPTCHAs, right? Everyone uses CAPTCHAs to try to prevent some of these attacks. Does it have the ability to look at the behavior or intent of the page or the attack of what they want to do? The only way that you can solve some of these problems is use AI and machines. Because you have to effectively take that first generation approach, and maybe they had 100 data scientists sitting behind that, right? You now have to be able to explode those 100 data scientists to 10, 20, 30, 50,000 data scientists, right? The equivalent of that, where they're continually looking at that information. Because this is the criticality of this. These attacks are very short-lived because they're very inexpensive to create. And if you don't detect it at that time, you will fail. You will have some break-ins. And I'm also asked the question, hey, can I prevent this through some assessments, right? There's assessment tool. There's some of these training tools out there, right? So I set up some simulated phishes, and I go out and I try to say, target my user population. I create some unique techniques and almost try to get them to click on something. Or I have a
Hmm.
posture that says part of that, don't click on anything. It's not going to work. I'm telling you. And the reason for that, when we look at the analysis, and part of what we do is also live reinforced training. The person that clicks on an attack in those phishing simulations, when they go back and test them again, they're going to 90% of the people that clicked before do it again. And the reason before that, because of this, it's because people get very busy. They're working in and out, as we talked, in and out of their personal work life today. They're distracted, and you just fall for these things. And we all know when you're doing computer-based training, you sit there and you try to click it as fast as possible, go through it because you just want to get it over with, and I get my compliance certificate. But then it comes back and you get attacked. As I said, this is the reason why we see the same abusers of phishing inside of an organization are repeat abusers. And so the training in and of itself will never prevent these type of attacks. They will continue to occur.
Yeah, you make a great point there. I mean, if we're getting, say, 100 email messages a day, we're going to go through those as quickly as we can. And I mean, you have to be a computer forensic, analyzer of some kind to look through every single URL in every HTML email message that you have, before you click it to make sure that it's valid. It gets very, very tough. And, education, like you said, only goes so far. So, what can companies do really to mitigate these types of attacks? In fact, I think that's kind of the theme of a lot of the questions that are coming in, which is, this is undoubtedly a huge problem. We are trying to use MFA. We're trying to, tell our users to be careful. But what else can we do?
So as I said, I've been in the security business for quite some time. I go way back. I'm going to date myself to Novell days and late 90s and running proxy products, Port 80 products, and then went to Cashflow and Blue, which became Blue Coat. I also own the single sign-on products. And so again, I've been in and around the firewall proxy single sign-on space for quite some time. And while we've continued to evolve, right, and you have different tools out there that are protecting from a layered defense approach. As I said, any good security posture is a multi-layered security posture. And as I also said, the generations of products that are out there meant to detect and block phishing were built around them, again, what we would call this first generation or 1.0 phishing detection and protection. But they use that static reputation, non-dynamic runtime analysis to detect and block these things. And that's the reason why, again, it's not uncommon when we go talk to a customer, they will have, as an example, they could have Zscaler on the proxy side. You could have Palo Alto on the firewall front. I could have CrowdStrike on my endpoint, or McAfee, or pick another endpoint security product. And I may have Proofpoint or Mimecast or even E5 Defender inside my email. And there's this belief I'm protected. But I'm telling you right now, you're not. And the reason for that is because of that first generation detection approach. So we fundamentally believe you have to fight these second generation phishing attacks that are coming through these different communication channels, not just email and these other payloads of phishing. You have to fight it with a second generation anti-phishing approach. And the only way you can do that is use artificial intelligence, right? Again, you have to have the ability, and Gartner even put out a study on this. You have to have the ability to apply computer vision. You need to look at behavioral analysis and intent. You need to be able to look at natural language processing because there's different dialects from different parts of the world, and there's different unique aspects of what's going on. And you need to bring those things together to then make a runtime determination, a dynamic analysis. Again, having these machines fight these machines um, to detect and block these attacks. And so I think that's fundamentally important. You put that quote last layer of defense in here for phishing. and also recognize, because it's no longer coming through the firewall. It used to be we could have this choke point, and there's always been this age old, and I was involved in this long ago, this age old battle of agents versus agentless. I
Mm-hmm.
think the number one thing, everyone would obviously choose agentless at any time, at any place, because I don't have to manage anything out there. I would say one final piece here, that phishing in many respects, because I am coming through all these different communication channels like SMS that we talked, you can't stop all this stuff inside the network. Because people aren't going through the network anymore. I'm remote everywhere, right? There's no longer this definition of an inside the perimeter or outside the perimeter. I am everywhere at all times now, wherever that may be. And second, there's new encryption techniques, right? The TLS 1.3 inside of a browser, where I can't even see this stuff traversing through the different channels. And the only way I actually see this is in clear text at the endpoint. And that's the reason why we also do believe that you're going to have to solve much of these things at the endpoint. I know it adds a quote another ability from an agent standpoint, but because we have app stores and because we have browser extension stores, there's a way to offer these things in a set and forget type of service. And I point it again out because encryption will become more prevalent, based off even some things. I'm not going to get into politics whatsoever, but obviously you've seen a just shift of different aspects going on where encryption will become more prevalent, and the use of these different channels will become more prevalent. And because of that, these bad actors are going to become more prevalent in those same exact channels. And you need to put that multi-layer defense in place.
Excellent. So when you say AI, and I heard you mention kind of a virtual sandbox there, and endpoint, and put this on the endpoint, I'm kind of envisioning a piece of software out there on the endpoints that are essentially analyzing the email before the user ever has a chance to. Is that
Yeah. So
kind of headed in the right direction?
yeah. So again, I ultimately when I'm talking about multi-layer, you can look at it from an email defense, you can look at a network defense, and you can look at an endpoint defense, and that is something we support across those dimensions.
Okay.
What I was really getting to on the endpoint, because of, as an example, an SMS attack comes in, you're not going to see that quote inside the perimeter or inside the network or inside your email, right? The only place that you actually see that is on that particular mobile device, right, that you
Yeah.
have. And so if you're not actually running on this device, and let me take it one step further, this is now a targeted SMS attack that's never been seen anywhere in the wild. It's only come to you. If you not only you not only have to have the detection engine on here. So as an example, we deliver our intelligence down here to block common things that we see, but we also have local machine learning running on this device. So we can do a quick scan, as an example, inside of a text message. Remember, I said about the IRS scam call as an example. Call this because you're going to get audited immediately, and if you don't do it in the next hour, you've seen those type of attacks where
Mm-hmm.
go change your password and chase, call this number. So we have the ability to also do natural language attacks called these smishing attacks. If anyone's ever heard of the term BEC, business email compromise, you have the equivalent of that in text messaging. But again, only way you're going to be able to discover that is on device machine learning, where you can you detect that and block it on this particular device. So that's what I mean by multi-layer defense, that you can have a combination of endpoint things where it makes sense, together with email security and together with even agentless based security inside of a network. The only challenge, again, as I point out, there's far fewer numbers of folks inside that network. And it's really, I would say moving forward, the prevalence, the predominance is going to be actually protecting on these devices themselves.
Great advice. I mean, you've gotten me really excited about this next generation phishing protection technology from SlashNext. So that brings us to this question, last question here, really, before we move into our Q&A, and that is just, how can SlashNext help? What do you all do for folks out there who are interested in getting started with this?
So as I said, it's not uncommon when we engage with customers. They say, "Listen, I'm protected, right?" So I'd say first and foremost, educate yourself. Because back to this point, again, a typical customer can have that multiple layers of defense right now. That first generation, whether it be the proxy defense or the email defense or firewall defense or even endpoint defense. Um, so I'd like to say let's show you with your own data if you've been attacked or not. Despite having done training, despite having these other defenses, let's show you. And again, it's very eye-opening. So we have the ability, and so it's a free assessment to go look at your firewall, your proxy, your umbrella or DNS logs, as well as the ability to go inside your O365 environment and say, in the O365, what got through Defender and what's currently laying in wait for the folks to click on, or on the other log side, who actively participated in a phish. And that is extremely eye-opening. I had one particular customer, he was now a customer. They said, "Oh, we're fine." And before we actually did this assessment, they're like, "Hey, I don't need to do anything." And perhaps I'd like what you have, but let's not talk further. Ran the assessment. Literally that evening after we went through the assessment, they bought. And the reason for that, we specifically showed them the users actively participating in these rogue browser software extensions. And in two cases, one was a malware that got laid or infected, and the second one was ransomware. And I really like to say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Don't necessarily bury your head in the sand that I am protected from this. And this doesn't have to even come from us. I just say that's how sophisticated, and it's in your network today. It's in your user population today. So a couple other stats I would point out. It's over the last 30 days, based off the large number of assessments we've run, it's typical that we will see between 10 to, at the high end, about 35% of users actively participating in phishing attacks. But even at the low end, wow. 10% is big. And then an aspect here, your high value target users, typically you like to think that they're not participating in this stuff, but they're the ones that are more actively participating than even other non-high value targets. So that's a second dimension we do see. Third, again, particularly in the email side, and we also just did a third-party test of us versus Proofpoint and Mimecast and E5, right, or Defender. At the low end, Microsoft performed the worst, right, in the 20% range of detection. But even the others were in 30% detection. It kind of goes back to the 70 and 80% of these attacks are getting through. That's why, again, zooming back here, number one, again, we offer this free assessment, and I think it has become very eye-opening. And obviously, the second piece, we do have that multi-layered defense that we can put in place, so you're protected from these phishing attacks, not just inside your network. Really, we call this a total phishing protection service. It is a set and forget service. It's automatically updated. There's no maintenance, and we've done a lot of comparatives against others out there in the market where we have the highest detection rate in the planet. We have very, very fast performance. Privacy matters to us. Everything we do is at the local endpoint. We never transmit PII information back to a cloud. And so that becomes very, very critical as the customers deploy this. So my advice here, obviously take advantage of that free assessment, and you can do with what you need to. At least it gives you a map of what's going on inside your current organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like a great opportunity for any company out there. I mean, we've got 30 questions here that have come in the queue. Everyone has concerns about phishing, and they're talking about what a great presentation this has been. I want to encourage everyone, before we jump into a few questions, to check out the handouts tab there. There's a link to slashnext.com, request a demo. You can request a demo right there from the handouts tab, and try this out for yourself. See how phishing is, I'm afraid, already in so many of our networks already. So Patrick, we've just got a few minutes left for some questions. Not sure how to prioritize these. There are so many excellent questions out there. First one I see is they were asking about browsers. I know you mentioned browser extensions. Are there certain browsers they're asking that are better than other browsers?
It's hard to judge, as one higher quality than another, because I know behind the scenes all these folks are working on improving their security posture. But the attacks we see correlate to the popularity of that particular browser. So number one being Chrome, and the popularity of these browser extensions, right? There's all these plugins coming in, and you simply cannot prevent that. We haven't seen a way, nor does necessarily Google want to prevent that, right? Because there's a lot of value add coming in these browser extensions. So the best defense there is actually have the defense that will detect and block the rogue browser software extensions coming into your environment. But as I said, it really, I don't see necessarily one versus the other being better. What I do see is the attacks correlated to the popularity of that particular browser. So Firefox and obviously Edge and et cetera. We cover all of them. And we actually use ourselves for PCs and Macs that lightweight browser extension because it is such an easy way to add value. And it's a very easy way to also update. But at the same time, because we also have these easy aspects and this great value you can add, the bad actors figure out how to take advantage of it.
Okay. Great advice. Another question here, Carrie's asking about, operating system. Is one operating system more prone to be phished than another?
Well, this is, again, I as you can see, I have not just gray, but some white hair now. I go back to my Novell days and competing against Microsoft, and certainly there's always been is the Windows environment safer than back then it was Unix and now Linux. What I would say is we still see a predominance of attacks, coming through a Microsoft environment, predominantly because it's still, particularly from an office productivity standpoint, by far the most prevalent out there from a use perspective. So naturally, you're going to see attacks come through that particular area because of the popularity. There is certainly, and this is independent of phishing, right? There's certainly an argument to be made that Linux and Unix are safer. And I'll let others debate that aspect, but there is some truth to that matter, right? Let's call a spade, and that's reason why Linux has grown in popularity. That said, what we are talking about here is somewhat independent of the operating system, right? We're really talking about communication channels now, right? And whether that be email or SMS or these social networking channels, or whether it be gaming, as I mentioned, anywhere that I can directly communicate with you is an opportunity for a phisher to attack you. And so this isn't an operating system problem. It's not a network problem. It's almost a user problem. And it's a communication channel because that's the most effective way to get to you as a user. And that's what you fundamentally have to look at is how do I protect users inside these different ways of communicating? Because they know that if I embed myself with some behavioral information, that means you're going to be susceptible. And then once I get you to fall for a phish, if it's a rogue browser software extension, that's when it dovetails down into, quote, not only in Google Chrome, but what is it running on? And that's where some of those defenses will matter.
Okay. Great advice. I want to call everyone's attention to the poll I just brought up there on the screen. The question is, what additional information would you like about the SlashNext solution? And this is a multi-select question, so feel free to select more than one option there. Of course, you can also go to the handouts tab and go to slashnext.com and request your own personal demo or assessment. But feel free to check the box on the poll here as well if you'd like any form of additional information. So let's see a few other questions we have time for. Maybe Dallas is asking, is there any combination of MFA, passwords, codes, biometrics that can actually be effective?
So yeah, I look at MFA or biometrics, et cetera, as another layer of defense, right? And I think any good defense has that layered defense approach. So absolutely take advantage of multi-factor or two-factor authentication where you can. Um, but there's other aspects I can, I know the folks at Octave well, and you have one login that certainly helps. But that helps on a dimension in credential harvesting or credential stealing, right? So if I leave you with nothing else today, the bad actors are using different types of phishing. It's not just credential stealing. It is inside, again, these rogue browser or rogue software, scareware, social engineering attacks. People may not realize, if you recall when Twitter got taken down, I don't know, was that 3 months ago? There was a 14-year-old that used a Bitcoin scam. It was a social engineering attack, and it was done by getting someone to call, right? That's something we saw in 2019. We detected that type of attack in 2018, and had they been using us, that would not have happened. So two-factor authentication and these other biometrics are really meant to deal with credential harvesting or credential stealing. And as I showed, while it does prevent attacks, and I absolutely advocate using those two-factor authentication, but as I also showed, number one, these bad actors can embed themselves inside of 2FA, right? This two-factor authentication. And second, they can also come at it from a different perspective. And so that's why I absolutely advocate, even independent of us, taking a second layer, a last line of defense approach on phishing and the second generation of phishing attacks.
Excellent. Let's see. Charlie says, this past year, we've had several phishing attacks, which resulted in a couple of costly compromises. What can we do to block phishing attacks in the event that a link is clicked or a file is opened via email? I know we've been talking about defense in depth and really next generation. It sounds like it would be great for Charlie to do an assessment with you guys at SlashNext.
Yeah. So Charlie, absolutely. Again, we can do the assessment and show you. Sounds like you've already been phished or you've had the active participation you just highlighted. Let me just briefly describe how we work. Right, we have hands down the world's biggest database for phishing, zero-hour phishing database, and this has been verified even by our friends that see all the world's internet traffic. And it's also been verified by the largest firewall vendor on the planet, because part of what we do is work with some of these other third-party ecosystems. So number one, we have the world's largest database. But number two, we have the ability, again, if you're deployed on an endpoint, so the time when you click a link, it is immediately blocked, right? You see this, and when it's blocked, we will also reinforce with a training page what that bad actor was trying to do. So if they were trying to steal a credential, we'll actually say, hey, this is a credential harvesting attempt. Be careful, right? So we're not only blocking in real time, it is real time. We do everything in 30 milliseconds or less. So it's very, very fast, very performant. But we'll also, again, do that live training to reinforce that behavior. So again, back to this point, I would say, number one, do that assessment. We can show you what's is currently sitting in your email environment, those bad leaks or the malicious links. Second, we can show you in your firewall, proxy, DNS, open DNS, really any log out there that we can show you who was actively phished. The only aspect I would say there, because people have moved outside the firewall, it's important if you want full visibility to get where that traffic is coming in. It could even be your CASB logs. That'll give you kind of a full 360-degree view of what's going on in your current environment. And then if you so choose and you were to implement something like our service, as I said, we will block at time and click and then reinforce with training.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's see. Anne says she already signed up for the assessment. That's awesome. Thank you. Julie's asking about the free assessment, risk assessment. Can you talk a little bit more about exactly, time commitment, how many team members would be involved, kind of in general, what's the process like?
It is, again, it's a very lightweight process. There's 4 fields we need in the log. We'll tell you what it is. The second, in this piece, by the way, our email assessment will go live, and you have the ability to do your own self-assessment. You effectively plug in your key for your API into O365. It'll go in and run a very fast assessment. So it's very lightweight. And through that, so once again, on the log side, there's 4 fields. It's the IP address, it's the URL, and the reason, and the host. And then once we have that, we'll run that against the database and tell you who was phished, or what type of phish it was and who was phished. So once that initial process is done, it does not require, literally there's one person that can give us that information. We'll run that within 24 hours, and then we'll give you an assessment report. We'll tell you who was, what phishes got through, what was actively participated in, who actively participated in, and then what the attacks were meant to do, right? So was this a rogue browser software? What was that potential attack? What does that attack look like? And what did it potentially infect? So that's a report that we actually walk through with you. But back to the time commitment, it's really meant to be almost a zero time commitment, other than, as I said, sharing those 4 pieces in the log, as well as plugging into your API on O365.
Awesome. And Charlie actually wrote back and said, thank you. He'll definitely sign up for the assessment and pass this information on to his IT director as well. So okay. I'm afraid we're running out of time here in today's webinar slot. We still have 44 questions that we didn't have time to get back to. We'll do our best to respond to those after the event. Obviously, a lot of interest on this topic. It's obviously affecting so many companies out there. So Patrick, thank you for all that you're doing to help to prevent these types of phishing attacks, because they're affecting the lives of so many real IT professionals out there. Before we go, I want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. That's going to Kenneth Lim from Virginia. Congratulations, Kenneth Lim from Virginia. And if you haven't answered the poll question there on the screen, I encourage you to do that before you go. Patrick, it's been really excellent chatting with you today. Thank you so much for telling us about SlashNext and what's going on in the world of phishing.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure speaking with everyone.
And thank you, everyone out there in the audience. I hope that you learned a lot. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.